This presentation will focus on nutrition and healthy eating to help you manage your blood sugar levels. You can better manage diabetes by eating healthy foods and reducing foods that can raise blood sugar. We like to think of food as fuel. Think of your body like a car. You wouldn't want to drive around with your gas tank on empty, but you also wouldn't want to fill your tank up so much that gas comes pouring out. Your body is the same way. We want you to eat enough food so that you have the energy to do the things you want every day, but not so much food that your blood sugars go high. There are three nutrients that make up all the foods that we eat. The first is carbohydrates. Carbohydrates provide energy. They are the main source of fuel for the body. There are two types of carbs, simple carbs and complex carbs. Simple carbs are made up of sugar, and complex carbs are made up of starch and fiber. Simple carbs break down quickly in the body. This means that they cause blood sugar to rise quickly. Some examples of simple carbs include white rice, white bread, and baked goods. Complex carbs break down more slowly in the body. Therefore, they cause blood sugars to rise more slowly. Some examples of complex carbs include whole grains, beans, and vegetables. It's important to remember that all types of carbs will raise your blood sugar at least a little. The second nutrient is fat. Fat helps us to stay full for longer because it breaks down more slowly than carbohydrates. We need fat in the diet to absorb vitamins A, D, E, and K. And while we want to include healthy sources of fat in the diet, it's important to limit trans and saturated fats. Fat has less of an effect on blood sugar levels than carbohydrates. The third nutrient is protein. Protein also helps us to stay full for longer. Protein acts as the building blocks for all parts of the body, including muscle, bones, skin, and hair. Like fat, protein has less of an effect on blood sugar levels than carbohydrates. Now let's look at some examples of foods that raise blood sugar. Cereal, rice, pasta, cookies, potatoes, bread, fruit, tortillas, both corn and flour, beans, corn, regular soda, and juice are all examples of foods that can raise blood sugar levels. Now let's look at examples of foods that have less of an effect on blood sugar levels. Chicken, beef, fish, eggs, cheese, nuts, vegetables, cottage cheese, avocados, diet soda, and oils have less of an effect on blood sugars than the foods on the left. Now that we know which foods raise our blood sugar levels, let's learn how to use these foods to create a balanced plate. Remember, carbohydrates are our fuel source, so it's not about cutting out carbs altogether. What we want to focus on is balancing out our carbs with protein and vegetables. It may be helpful to take a picture of this handout for future use. The first thing we want to do when we're thinking about creating a balanced meal is to make sure that half of our plate is filled with vegetables. The second thing we want to think about is getting a high quality source of protein. This should take up about a quarter of our plate. Then we want to round out our meal with carbohydrates, preferably complex carbohydrates. This will also take up about a quarter of the plate. On this handout, with each meal, you also get a glass of milk and a piece of fruit. These two items are optional for the meal. You don't have to eat them. If you're not going to have the glass of milk or the piece of fruit, you could have a little bit more carbohydrates. Here we have our plate. This plate is 10 inches, so it's a little bit bigger than the 9-inch plate than we saw on the diagram earlier. On this quarter of the plate, we would want to put our protein. And on this quarter of the plate, we would want to put our carbohydrates. Then, we would want to focus on filling the other half of the plate with vegetables. First, let's look at a common breakfast, cereal and milk. Now, cereal and milk are both considered carbohydrates, so we would want to balance that out with some protein, like an egg. With this meal, you'd also get a piece of fruit about the size of a baseball. Because it's breakfast, don't worry about filling the other half of your plate with vegetables. Next, let's look at a common dinner. chicken, and rice. The chicken in this meal is our protein, and the rice is our carbohydrates. So now we just need our vegetables. I've got carrots and peas. If you don't like peas, you could always swap it out for something like broccoli, just as long as the vegetables are about half of your plate. With this meal, you also get a glass of milk and a piece of fruit. If you wanted beans, you'd have to swap them out for the rice because they're both considered carbohydrates. If you wanted both, you would need to eat a smaller portion of both of them. Not all foods fit perfectly on the plate. Tacos are a great example of this. It can help to break these foods down based on their ingredients. For tacos, we have chicken and we have tortillas. The chicken in the tacos acts as our protein, and the tortillas act as our carbohydrates. Now, the toppings on the tacos probably don't equal a whole half plate worth of vegetables, so we have to add some extra. With this meal, you also get a glass of milk and a piece of fruit. If you didn't want the fruit, you could have an extra tortilla. Spaghetti is another great example of a food that doesn't fit perfectly on the plate. But let's take a look at the ingredients. The meat in the meatballs acts as our protein, and the noodles acts as our carbohydrates. Once again, the sauce for the spaghetti probably doesn't equal a whole half a plate full of vegetables, so we'll need to add some extra. With this meal, you get a glass of milk and a piece of fruit. If you didn't want the glass of milk or the piece of fruit, you could have some extra noodles. Thanks for watching. If you have questions, contact your diabetes specialist or primary care clinic. For emergency questions related to your diabetes, you may also contact the Denver Health Nurse Line at 303-739-1211.